Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and for those that have followed me for a while, you know that I absolutely love video games, and one of the best to come out this year is, of course, Expedition 33. The game itself is fantastic. It has a very intriguing story and a ton of memorable characters, some of my favorites being the Gestrals. I love these guys. They come in all different shapes and sizes. They have like little marionette bodies made out of wood, and they have paint bristles for their hair. And I thought it'd be awesome if I had one as a muse in my shop to watch me while I craft. So I digitally sculpted Noco. And if you would like your own, I do have a free STL available for him over on my website. So if you want to see me bring a Gestral to life, let's go ahead and get started. Now, when I like to sculpt digitally or traditionally, I like to have some kind of a reference in my head. That way I'm not just jumping in and moving clay around without an actual goal. So in this case, I'm doing some quick sketches on a whiteboard just to get some ideas flowing. Now, because most of the Gestrals have shorter legs and smaller feet, I knew that getting him to stand was going to be an issue unless he was on a base. So my backup plan to that was to have him sit on the edge of a shelf. And the easiest way to do that was just to insert a block underneath him and then cut that away so he sat flush. Then once I was okay with the overall blocked out base shape, I could then start to go in and add the details, like the pins in his knees and his elbows and the wood grain across his body. Once the file was complete, I could then send it over to my Bambu and have it printed out in gray PLA. To me, the color of the PLA doesn't ever really matter because I end up painting my figures anyway. Just like the snowman, one thing you'll notice is that I orientate the character so the print layer lines actually add to the wood textures. And even though the Bambu does a great job, there's always going to be a little bit of sanding and flashing removal involved. Now, I'm still trying to get familiar with the alphas in Nomad, so my wood texture here is pretty soft, but that's also because I planned on applying a Bondo and acetone mixture directly to the surface. This thinned down glaze gives just enough buildup to cover up print layer lines that I don't want, but also leaves enough material that I can scribe into it to get some really cool details. With the Bondo layers dry, I can now start to really apply that wood grain texture that I'm going for by using a wire brush. The wire brush is hard enough to scratch very fine lines into the Bondo, but unless a lot of pressure is applied, it's not going to mess up the PLA underneath. These small imperfections in the wood can also be applied using a dental pick tool as well. This allows me to get some really nice fine lines etched into the surface. Looking at my reference images, he has some small cracks in the wood at various spots. So to achieve this look, I'm going to be using a couple different types of pin files. These are strong enough that they actually allow me to go through the Bondo down into the PLA. Small divots can also be removed using a hobby knife. Now, all this sanding does generate a lot of dust, so I make sure to wipe down the figure before adding some red oxide primer. My first layer here is going to be a wash of Liquitex Heavy Body Burnt Umber. This will be applied over the entire surface using a lot of water, and this is because I want the pigments to run down into all of those scratches that I applied into the surface. Next, I'm going to be mixing some colors into the burnt umber. I'm going to start using some Neutral Gray 5 and a little bit of Mars Black. Both of these are going to tone down that really red look and start to make the wood look more aged. For the mid-tone on this character, I'm going to be mixing together some raw umber and Neutral Gray 5. Here I'm using a filbert brush and I'm adding a little bit of water, but not a lot. I want the paint to go down onto the surface more as a dry brush, leaving gaps in between the different wood textures. A small amount of unbleached titanium is added to this mixture. This is going to be applied to more select areas like the tops of his belly, shoulder, thighs, and arms. My references also show that Noco has some paint splatter on him, so to start to replicate that, I'm going to tap the surface with a dry mop brush. While I allow that to dry, let's start to work on some of the metallics. I apply some Liquitex Mars Black as the base color for the back of his head and all of the joints, including his shoulders, elbows, knees, and hips. This is just developing a shadow for all the metallics that will go on top. And since all the rest of his body is dry, I can now address the metal at the top of his head as well. For the metallic highlights, I'm going to be using some Liquitex Iridescent Rich Silver. Now, one thing to note in the video is that I'm not applying the metallics to the entire kneecap or shoulder. I'm picking specific points to highlight, utilizing that black base. This visually gives a good separation in between all these individual pieces, and through this painting process I am switching back and forth between a detail brush and a very small filbert brush. With a figure at this scale, it doesn't have to be insanely detailed up close, but how does it read from a couple feet away? As a contrast to the silver, I'm going to be using one of my favorite products, and that's Dirty Down Rust. This is a water-soluble liquid that once applied starts to have a chemical reaction and has the appearance of rust. What's nice is if you get this liquid where you don't want it, a watered down brush is all you need to move it around. With my Dirty Down cured, I can now go back with just a little bit of iridescent rich silver as a final highlight. The paint splatter on this figure just wasn't enough for me, so we're going for round 2. After that was splattered on, a little bit of Liquitex parchment was added to it. After the paint had been splattered onto the surface using an old toothbrush, I'll then go in with another brush that's dry or my fingers to remove the excess paint. I was liking this highlight color so much that I got a very fine detail brush and started to accentuate some of those lines in the wood. All of the Gestrals are a little bit different in the game. Some of them have bright colors on their surface, some of them have tattoos. Noco has rings of various thicknesses that go around his arms and his legs. That highlight color that I was using in the last step, I'm also using here, but I'm not adding any water. I'm just using a small liner brush and taking my time to work around the figure. As a highlight to these a little more, the parchment was added into the mixture. But as you can see, I'm not painting the entire line this time. I'm just picking out raised areas within the line to highlight. And of course, you don't have to paint yours like Noco. You could be creative with this part of the process and paint it however you'd like. In some areas, the lines are just a little too fine for me, so I'm going to take a small flat brush and a little bit of water, and I'm going to rub the white line away, giving it more of a worn look. I could then go back with a very fine detail brush and then just dot the paint in specific areas. And for those that are new to my channel, I know it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of layers. But if you continue to watch me in my painting process, you'll know that I love layers. And I'll always preach that paint makes the prop. I mean, does this look like standard gray PLA anymore? Now, Noco does have a splash of color here and there. Very fine flecks of paint can be found on his face and body. And to apply these, I'm going to be using some cadmium-free red medium. After that splattering is dry, I'll go in with the detail brush and start to highlight those areas that I see in my reference images. And I know it's not a lot, but it makes a huge difference breaking up the color of the body. For his hair, I'm going to be using a very large brush that I found on Amazon designed for deck staining. I chose this specific one because I knew the bristles would be soft, but I also like that white at the top because it needs to be painted. So after I had disassembled the brush, I could take clumps of the bristles and set them aside. The bristles that have clumps of glue at the bottom already, they're already embedded into it, so there's no need to remove it. My plan here is to fill the cavity at the top of his head with some hot glue from Surebonder. Then all I had to do was just insert the bristles down into the hot glue before it had a chance to solidify. The bristles themselves look a little too perfect, and since they are synthetic, I test distressing them with a little bit of heat, which works great. So on a low setting on my heat gun, I slowly work my way around the figure. Now you gotta be careful because if you add too much heat, it'll melt the bristles and they'll turn into a blob. So I'm being very mindful of how far away the heat gun is. And the deck stain kit included a comb, which did come in handy. To get some variation in height in the bristles, I did up fanning them and then cutting them at a slight angle. All of this distressing just added to the overall ratty look in the end, and I think it turned out great. Now Noco has a little bit of red at the top of his hair, and I felt that I could replicate that using some Army Painter speed paint, Slaughter Red. This pigment was fed through the airbrush, and I did multiple passes around the figure so that it wouldn't come out pink. I even made sure to fan the bristles out so I could get to the middle as well. But all in all, I think this figure turned out great, and I know at this point I am still very new to the 3D sculpting aspect. But one advantage I do have over a lot of people that do 3D printing is that I know how to paint and I know how to weather. So if you enjoy 3D printing but you're apprehensive to the overall painting process, definitely give me a sub and follow along. I'll always say, even when it comes to EVA foam, I'm a good builder, but I'm a really good painter. And I guarantee you, if you watch my videos, I'll make sure that those props you're printing out look fantastic in the end. So hopefully you enjoyed this project, and if you have not played Expedition 33 yet, I highly recommend it. And if you are printing off any of my models, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations.